Hi, this is Philip Guerra. I am the president, founder, and CEO of the Electronic Free Press News Corporation, also known as EFPnews.com. In the information age, or also known as the age of disinformation, the news media has become diverse, biased, and very partial to different points of view. So with the age of information and also the age of disinformation, who can you trust? That is the question.
On other news, Americans have lost faith in our news media. Take a look at this exchange between Bill O'Reilly and Ted Koppel on Fox So-Called News last week.
The millions of people are watching those of you with a particular point of view. So
that's the way the country works. That's the free marketplace.
That's the free marketplace, and I'm perfectly content to leave it on that note. It's a business, and it's operating as a business. And once upon a time, you and I actually thought journalism was a calling.
What Koppel is getting at is that too often today, Americans are fed infotainment rather than the news they need to know. Infotainment sells well and translates into higher advertising revenues, but it doesn't inform Americans on the issues that we need to know about to make informed political decisions. And now Americans are starting to wake up to this fact. According to a new Gallup poll, American distrust of the news media reached an all-time high this year, with 60% saying they have little or no trust in the corporate mass media to report the news fully, accurately, and fairly. Despite the Fox So-Called News being the most watched network on corporate cable news, Republicans led the poll in their distrust of the media, with only 26% of self-identified Republicans saying that they trust the mass media. This is all because investigative journalism and news in the public interest are dead today, by and large hijacked by corporate interests. There's only one industry specifically mentioned in the United States Constitution. That's the press. Our founders knew that American democracy hinges on a free and vigorous press. Today, we no longer have either. It's time to bring back American democracy by bringing back news in the public interest.
So we are being fed infotainment instead of news much of the time. Yes, we do hear the breaking news story events that are happening now, but at the same time, we're not being told important news information about what's really happening on the streets, or news that could affect us personally at home. EFPnews.com hopes to bring you these stories, and as you can see, I'm going to share a few examples with you here.
But this type of technology, the technology to avoid this type of disaster does exist. So why aren't we using it to upgrade the nation's electrical grid? Peter Vincent Pry, Executive Director of the Task Force on National and Homeland Security, says it is a matter of politics.
And Dr. Pry joins us right now. Dr. Pry, we thank you for taking time to be with us today on America's Forum.
Well, thank you for having me to talk about this esoteric but vitally important subject.
When I first got to Congress, three of the first initials I heard, Dr. Pry, were EMP. Now, it sounds like the stuff of science fiction, but it is science fact. Could you elaborate for us what an EMP-caused blackout would bring about, how it would happen?
Sure. An EMP can be caused by Mother Nature, by the sun. A solar flare striking the Earth's magnetosphere will generate a geomagnetic storm, or an electromagnetic pulse, which is basically it's like a super energetic radio wave that has so much energy in it that it will couple into electronics, collapse electric grids, destroy everything depends directly or indirectly upon electricity. And so within 72 hours of the blackout of the electrical infrastructure is collapsed. And basically our electronic society gets cast back to pre-electronic days. You can do the same thing with a nuclear weapon, detonated at high altitude, above the atmosphere, above an altitude of 30 kilometers. If you were to detonate a nuclear weapon, let's say 300 kilometers over the center of the United States, you might not even see it if it were a cloudy day. You wouldn't hear it. It would be too far away. There wouldn't be any blast or thermal effects experienced on the ground. The only thing it would produce would be this electromagnetic pulse. But it would cover the entire continental United States, collapse the electric grids everywhere, and couple into small things. cars wouldn't start, your personal computers would fail. And this is not just an inconvenience. An EMP of these sorts caused by the sun or caused by a nuclear weapon would be protracted, permanent, given our current situation. It could last years, and we can't survive, even for a year, without electricity. The EMP Commission on which I served estimated that given our current unpreparedness, within a year of a natural or nuclear EMP event that caused a national blackout, we could lose up to 9 to 10 of Americans from starvation, disease, and societal collapse. It's basically a high-tech means of killing people the old-fashioned way. And we know this is why Iran wants the bomb. North Korea has the capability to do this. In fact, we think they have a super EMP nuclear weapon. And it is in the contingency plans of Russia and China as well to do nuclear EMP attacks in the United States.
Well, when we hear from you, Dr. Pry, and the dire consequences, and especially those who have designs on getting their hands on nuclear devices that could result in an EMP over the continental United States, what's stopping us from taking action? Politics, pure and simple, or break it down for us, in your opinion, Dr. Pry?
Sure. Well, I can assure you it is the politics. It isn't the technology. We've known for 50 years how to protect against EMP offense in the Department of Defense. When I was worked in the CIA, there was a time when the things we're talking about now were deeply classified. The commission on which I served declassified much of this, so now we can talk about it in the open. But there such things as Faraday cages, and surge arresters, and blocking devices can be utilized to protect against the EMP. And it's not expensive either. We estimated that it would cost about $2 billion, that's billion with a B, to protect the national electric grid, 10 to 20 billion to protect all the critical infrastructures. But $2 billion is what we give away every year in foreign aid to Pakistan. Surely we can afford that on a one-time expenditure to protect 9 of 10 American lives. The problem is called the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, or NERC, which is basically, it's supposed to be the organization to provide for the reliability of the electric grid, but it's really a lobby for the 3,000 electric utilities. They don't want bills passed at the national level, like the GRID Act or the SHIELD Act, that are currently in front of Congress, and which would empower the U.S. Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to require them to harden the grid. They don't want the government to have this additional regulatory authority. And that's the problem. And Washington is so broken that all you have to do is buy 1 or 2 people on the right committee. In this case, it's the House Energy and Commerce Committee. And even though there's broad bipartisan support, we actually got the GRID Act through the House of Representatives once. Everybody voted for it, Republicans and Democrats alike. But one senator stopped it and held it up, and that's basically the problem. Washington is so broken, you can thwart the will of the Congress if you just get the right person on the right committee, and you can hold things up. And they've successfully held things up for nearly half a decade now.
Well, Dr. Pry, let's name names. Who was the one senator that was able to thwart the bipartisan, near unanimous sentiment of the U.S. House of Representatives?
Well, I still have to work with these people, and I've been told that it was a mistake, and that if we can get the bill over to the Senate side, that it won't happen again. So I don't want to name names, so you'll forgive me for doing so.
Well, you're being a diplomat, and we should point out that one of the customs of the Senate is any one of the 100 can place a legislative hold on any bill for any reason, and there's a veritable cloak of anonymity at work there too. But we appreciate, Dr. Pry, your efforts at diplomacy. It's our job on this side of the camera to ask some of those questions. John Bachman, you've got an interrogative for the good doctor.
Yeah, Dr. Pry, we talked about this in the past, but bring it up again. When this was last before the Senate, I remember talking to former Senator Joseph Lieberman, who was trying to spearhead the effort, I believe, if I remember correctly, to get this passed through the Senate. After it failed, he expressed a lot of frustrations and basically said, in order for anything like this to actually pass Congress, we're going to unfortunately have to have some sort of major event to get the political will to do this. Is that what you believe as well? There's nothing short of an attack that's going to make this happen?
If I did believe that, I would move my family to Belize, because the consequences would be so catastrophic that there will be no second chance.
I'm Joe Biggs with Infowars.com, standing outside of the Western Refinery in El Paso, Texas. Now, the reason I picked this site is because we now know that ISIS is the largest funded terrorist organization in the world. The reason why is because they're taking over places such as this right behind me all across the Middle East. They're able to take these over, and they are now making tons and tons of money. Now, the reason they picked Juarez could be a strategic move. This is just right across the border. Juarez is no more than a few miles to my left. Now we also have, many other buildings in this area that we've talked about. We have the military base, FBI has an office, but those are just things to think about, whether or not that's why they picked this spot. But there's another really interesting article out right now in the Washington Examiner, so if you would like to take a look, it says, new ISIS threat, America's electric grid, blackout could kill 9 out of 10 people. This article came out today, so I encourage you to go check it out. Now, there's some interesting points in here. One of the leading experts on the grid said inadequate grid security and a porous U.S.-Mexico border and fragile transmission systems make the electric grid a target for ISIS, said Peter Pry. And like I said, he is one of the leading experts on the grid. By one estimate, should the power go out and stay out for over a year, 9 out of 10 Americans would likely perish. And the reason being, hospitals going down, your non-perishable, your frozen foods, things like that would go bad. The water supplies would shut down because of the power needed to help push that water through to your homes. So it's a very big threat. And they're saying that there's horrible security at these power grid structures across our country. And all they need to do with the amount of money they have is activate these jihadist, sleeper cells in the country. And then why not pay some of the cartels? That's a lot of people with a lot of money and a lot of power and the weaponry to come over here and easily take over a place like this and then start shutting down power grids all across the country. This is a very huge threat. It's something that we need to look into, and it's something just to be aware of. I'm not saying it can happen or will happen, but they do have the money, and they have been doing it in the Middle East. So why not come over here to where their biggest enemy is and try to do it here? But I do have to say this. We're not the kind of people who are going to sleep on it. We will stand up. We will rise. Liberty prevails. We will do the best we can to conquer that enemy. Once again, I'm Joe Biggs with Infowars.com.
Pretty serious talk here about our national security and the fact that we are extremely vulnerable to an attack from ISIS from electromagnetic pulse. This is something that has been talked about on Fox, that ISIS would hire a Mexican drug cartel to combine forces and attack us in the U.S. This is one of many threats now that affect us and affect us because of our broken borders as well.
One quick question, Doctor. How clear and present is this danger? What's the likelihood, say, because you mentioned even a solar flare can create this, what's the likelihood that, say, in the next 5 to 10 years, that we could see a major event that would cause a regional or even a massive national outage as far as our electric grid goes?
If we do nothing to protect our grid, I think it's almost a certainty. Iran is within 2 months of getting the bomb, according to the administration. I personally believe they already have the bomb, and the only reason that they haven't struck us yet is because of their obscure eschatological reasons about the return of the 12th Imam. They look for signs and portents about when to do this. The North Koreans, don't forget we had a nuclear crisis with North Korea just last February, March, and April, where they were threatening to make a nuclear missile strike on us. And on the very day that the mysterious attempted sabotage of the Metcalfe transformer substation in California happened, North Korea's KSM-3 satellite was over the Washington, D.C., New York corridor, the perfect location and altitude for taking out the eastern grid with an EMP attack. It might have been a larger dry run for what North Korea, Iran, Russia, and China all describe as a all-out cyber warfare operation. And in their doctrine, in their military doctrine, cyber warfare is not limited to computer viruses and hacking. It includes things like Metcalfe-type assaults, physical sabotage, all the way up to nuclear EMP attack.
Well, Dr. Pry, you have sounded the alarm in much the same way Paul Revere did. Of course, he used the lanterns. We need our electrical grid. We need our electrical power. But we thank you, sir. torturing this metaphor perhaps to shed some light on EMP and the very real hazards. We appreciate your evaluation of that.
It was reported in the national news media that ISIS had the potential to hire a Mexican drug cartel to cross the U.S. border and be able to detonate a device or carry weapons to and take over a facility that would handle the power grid. And not just in one part of the United States, but all parts of the United States. But this isn't the only way that this can happen. So we're very vulnerable. We could have protected this more than 50 years ago. It's not that costly. And right now, our two politicians running for presidential office are really not doing that much to address these very serious vulnerabilities that we face as a nation.
There are several governments out there that have the capacity to hack into one of our power grids. Indeed, the intelligence analysts that I've spoken to who really focus on this subject believe that the Chinese have been in the system for a long time and that the Russians have been in the system for a long time. The good news is we have so many interlocking interests with the Russians and with the Chinese that the expectation is they're not going to do it. It would be too big a threat to the United States, too big an insult to our not just national dignity, but national survivability. It would be an act of war. The problem is, as you go down the scale of capability, you come up against countries like Iran and North Korea. They are on the verge of having the capability of knocking out one of our grids. And the fact of the matter is, certainly in the case of North Korea, more likely to do it because they are simply less predictable. We have fewer, if any, interlocking interests with the North Koreans. And finally, you come up with a group like ISIS, which has an estimated $2 billion that they have stolen and somehow accumulated over the last couple of years. The fear is that ISIS may be able to buy both the expertise and the equipment with which they could do this. And they have no interlocking interests with the United States. So there are very, very few, if any, restraints on a group like ISIS from doing something like this.
And that story in itself would be enough. That's enough of a threat to look at, but we are faced with multiple threats. And one of the multiple threats is definitely an economic one. Everything from China devaluing our currency, and also the economic collapse that would happen if Puerto Rican debt would not be resolved.
I just want to let you know that the Puerto Rican government has confirmed they are going to make a $600 million, it's actually $640 million GEO bond payment on July 1st, but they still owe by the end of July $870 million. So two major threats. Which poses the greater risk to the United States? Here now, Peter Schiff, the CEO of Euro Pacific Capital and the owner of an apartment, as I understand it, in Puerto Rico. You actually have your company's major offices are in Puerto Rico. Are you comfortable being there with all this debt hanging over you?
Well, I didn't buy any of the debt. I'm not that dumb. I bought some real estate, which has actually gone up in value. But I have an office there, too. It's my asset management company, which moved to San Juan about a year and a half ago from Newport Beach, California, where I had a 50% effective tax rate, and now I have a 4% effective tax rate. So I think that was a smart move, but I didn't buy any bonds, nor did I recommend that any of my clients buy Puerto Rican bonds.
Well, let's talk about those bonds. There are millions of people in the United States who don't even know that their retirement investments or the mutual funds that they're invested in actually hold Puerto Rican debt. Puerto Rico is going to make the GEO bond payment, but they run out of money mid-July. They cannot continue to make their payments. They made that very clear. So are we facing default? And if the answer is obviously yes, what happens to the millions of retirees who don't even know they're exposed?
Yeah, we're certainly facing default. I've been advocating default for Puerto Rico because I think they borrowed too much money. Unfortunately, because of the low interest rates, we enticed their politicians. Everybody wanted Puerto Rican bonds. All those muni bond managers wanted that triple tax-free debt because it was tax-free everywhere. And so they borrowed a lot of money, made a lot of promises to get elected, and now the bills are coming due and they can't pay. And I don't think they should be struggling. I think they should default.
So, Peter, I mean, the U.S. exposure to Greece is essentially nil. U.S. exposure to Puerto Rico is much greater. So is it obviously the greater threat? And if so, specifically how?
Well, sure. I actually think we benefited from the Greece problems because it caused some capital flight into the United States. But Puerto Rico is going to mean losses for Americans who are holding Puerto Rican debt. But I think it also could mean a re-rating of all municipal debt as creditors start to become a little bit more risk adverse and start to price in a default, not just in Puerto Rico, but other municipalities.
Chicago.
And the reality is, though, yes, and many other cities, but the reality is that Puerto Rico is in better fiscal shape than the United States. They have a lower debt to GDP than we do. The only difference is investors aren't worried yet because the Fed is monetizing all of our debt. If we had a QE program for Puerto Rico, they wouldn't have a problem either. They can keep on borrowing money.
What you've just said, so that we can all understand, is that Puerto Rico poses a greater threat to the United States because it's going to drive up the cost of cities like Chicago, New York, Portland, Maine. Anybody who issues bonds to raise money, the cost of doing that is going to go up because of what's going to happen when Puerto Rico defaults.
Sure, and also Americans lose money. Most Americans don't own any Greek government bonds, but they probably own some Puerto Rican government bonds, whether they know it or not. They're in their muni bond portfolio. But this is just a look into America's future. And also, for all those people out there that think a $15 an hour minimum wage is a good thing, in Puerto Rico, the effective minimum wage is $15 an hour when you take into account their lower income, and they've got 20% unemployment. The labor force participation rate in Puerto Rico is only 42% because of the minimum wage. You've destroyed employment in Puerto Rico with a high minimum wage. So the same thing would happen on the mainland if we're dumb enough to raise minimum wage to $15 here.
Peter Schiff, we're going to give you the final word. Thank you for joining us, sir.
Wow. Great point from Peter.
As a citizen of this country, I am appalled, and one of the reasons that I started the Electronic Free Press was because you weren't being told a story about what was happening to Puerto Rico. A story where their hospitals were being shut down, their schools were being shut down because greedy politicians did not want to disappoint the companies like Goldman Sachs and Franklin Group and the other companies that are holders of Puerto Rican debt who want these people who are overburdened with a $70 billion debt to pay every penny back. Now, these are American citizens in Puerto Rico, and now the bill provided by the Obama administration clearly indicates and shows you what a third Obama term would look like, which is something that Hillary Clinton, or presidential candidate Hillary Clinton, is touting, is that she would continue much of the policies. And here's an example of those policies in action. Obama signed a bill that the Congress put together that offers only a very limited but very power usurping bill. They cite corruption, they'll cite anything, but here they take control and they leave an entire group of Americans voiceless. Is this what you want in America? Watch.
Well, the Senate is set to consider a bill to create a federally appointed control board with sweeping powers to run Puerto Rico's economy to help the island cope with its crippling debt crisis. The bill, known as Promesa, passed the House last week in a bipartisan vote of 297 to 127. Democratic Congressman Luis Gutierrez spoke out against the bill.
We're engaged today in a wholly undemocratic activity in the world's greatest democracy. We're debating how we will take power from the people who are virtually powerless already. Think about it. You are imposing a junta, because that's what they're calling it. There will be no difference between this junta and the junta of Pinochet in Chile. as far as the international community is concerned.
But many of Luis Gutierrez's longtime allies in the Congressional Progressive Caucus back the bill, including New York Congress members Jose Serrano and Nydia Velázquez, as well as Arizona Congressmember Raul Grijalva, who said the bill was needed to address Puerto Rico's humanitarian crisis.
H.R. 5278 is not the bill I would have drafted or the colleagues on my side of the aisle would have drafted. The Oversight Board is too powerful. The board is yet another encroachment on the sovereignty of the people of Puerto Rico, and rightfully so, they find it offensive. So here is the bottom line. Puerto Rico is drowning in debt, and H.R. 5278 is a lifeline. This is the only bill that will attract enough support from my Republican colleagues on that side of the aisle to pass in Congress, a Congress they control. Many of the provisions I oppose are the very provisions that will probably attract Republican support. We have worked for months across the aisle and with the administration, and this is a compromise with the best opportunity to pass. When measured against a perfect bill, this legislation is inadequate. When measured against the worsening humanitarian crisis in Puerto Rico, this legislation is necessary.
In the Senate, Robert Menendez, Dick Durbin, and Bernie Sanders have come out against the bill, and any one of them could filibuster the legislation. The debate in the Senate comes as the Supreme Court has issued two major decisions about Puerto Rico. On Monday, in a 5-2 decision, the High Court rejected Puerto Rico's bid to establish its own bankruptcy law that would have let the island's public utilities restructure about $20 billion those entities owe to bondholders. That decision came just days after the Supreme Court ruled against Puerto Rico in a separate case, a ruling that regarding the island's sovereignty, its sovereignty rights in criminal cases.
To talk more about these political and judicial developments, we're joined by two guests. From San Juan, Puerto Rico, we're joined by the city's mayor, Carmen Yulín Cruz. And here in New York, we're joined by Natasha Licia Orabañan, president of the National Lawyers Guild and associate counsel at Latino Justice. Her latest article for the Huffington Post is "The United States Makes the Case for Why Puerto Rico is Still Its Colony." Let's go first to San Juan, to the mayor. Your response to the legislation right now in Congress.
Well, first of all, good morning to everyone and greetings from San Juan, Puerto Rico. You don't add up a democratic situation. You don't put fuel to a fire. And what the Congress has done, what the President of the United States has done, what the judicial system has done, is they have unveiled to everyone, the international community and everyone in Puerto Rico, that we are a colony of the United States. Promesa is a broken promise to the people of Puerto Rico. They have put their backs towards the rights of Puerto Rican people, and they cannot move forward an agenda which will help the development of the Puerto Rican economy. Since 1952, the U.S. has admitted, based on the actions, that it has perpetrated a fraud on the international community when it asked for Puerto Rico to be taken out of the list of colonies. So we are a colony. That being said, what are we going to do in Puerto Rico, and what are the representatives? And I have to thank Luis Gutierrez for standing his ground and standing with the people of Puerto Rico on this. But what cannot happen, and what people need to know, is while in the U.S. people are fighting to increase minimum wage to $15 an hour, this colonial control board will lower minimum wage in Puerto Rico for people 25 or under at $4.25 an hour. This colonial control board could sell our natural resources, and this colonial control board will have sovereign powers to revoke anything that our next governor, our next legislature, or any public official of the Puerto Rican government elected by the democratic vote of the Puerto Rican people will do. So we have no voice because we have been left to be voiceless by those that claim to be the beacon of democracy in all of the world.
And Mayor Juline, I wanted to ask you, this control board has been compared to the D.C. control board that was established when the District of Columbia was in financial problems. But that control board required all the members, that legislation required all the members of the board to be residents of the District of Columbia. And also the federal government came in with financial aid by assuming all the pension liabilities of the District of Columbia. Whereas this legislation doesn't provide any kind of federal assistance, only a control board, 6 of whose 7 members can be from the United States, not from Puerto Rico. Why do you call it a colonial control board?
It's when the power resides in a group of people that have not been elected in another country, that is the definition of a colony. When you cannot even declare bankruptcy and the U.S. negates the right of the Puerto Rican people to produce a piece of legislation that will allow us to orderly declare bankruptcy, that is by definition what a colony is. Now, it's interesting. People may think that this colonial control board allows for a structure of the debt in Puerto Rico. That is not true. The majority of its members now will have to decide based on whatever they want and whatever issues and variables they want to put forth, if not when, if our debt will be restructured. So this is basically a control board done for the hedge funds of the world, for the hedge funds that, in a manner, knowing that Puerto Rico was in a crisis, gave money to the Puerto Rican people. Now, we have our own responsibility on this. We have to reform our government. We have to restructure what our priorities are, and we have to restructure the colonial relationship between Puerto Rico and the United States. So there is a shared silent cooperation that went on to produce the perfect crisis. Now, it's also important to note that the Puerto Rican people will have to pay $370 million to this control board for it to be functional. So not only are they taking democracy away from Puerto Rico, but they're also doing the following. It's costing us money to inflict pain on our own people, and that is totally unreasonable. I cannot think of anything more un-American than that.
I wanted to bring Natasha Licia-Ora-Banan into the conversation, the president of the National Lawyers Guild and Associate Counsel at Latino Justice Pearl Deaf. In addition to this legislation, PROMESA, the PROMESA Act, you've got 2 U.S. Supreme Court decisions involving Puerto Rico. Explain.
So as you said, I mean, the last week we've had 2 decisions by the Supreme Court that have dealt with the issue of Puerto Rico, but fundamentally deal with the issue that the mayor was talking about, which is the political relationship between the United States and Puerto Rico. This is the first time in a very long time, if perhaps ever, that every branch of the federal government has spoken clearly about the political status of Puerto Rico and has exposed the colonial relationship. So you had the decision in what's known as the Sanchez Valle case by the Supreme Court last week. That was an issue of double jeopardy that went up that essentially said that, you can't be charged for the same crime by 2 sovereigns, where the Supreme Court said Puerto Rico has no separate sovereignty. Other than that, ceded to it by the United States Congress, that ultimately the United States Congress is the ultimate source of all authority regarding Puerto Rico. And of course, it doesn't say that it's a colony, but it says that it has no separate sovereignty, it has no separate autonomy, which is the political and legal fiction that had been created in 1952.
Well, Natasha, both of these decisions, I read them both the majority decisions and the dissenting opinions. And I was struck especially by the Breyer dissent in the Sanchez Valle decision, where he really goes into exposing not only the historical relationship, but also the fact that the United States went before the international community and said, hey, in 1952, Congress granted Puerto Rico self-government, and that this, in effect, is now contradicting what the United States told the international community when the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico was first created.
That's exactly right. I mean, Breyer really looks at a less kind of textualist interpretation and says, let's look at in practice. In practice, Puerto Rico has has supposedly implemented some aspects of self-determination, self-governance, autonomy. But it's really the United States' position. And the oral argument, Breyer raised this question as well to the council and said, what is the United States' position before the international community after this case, after you filed a brief in this case explicitly saying that you don't believe that Puerto Rico has any sovereignty? This Monday is the annual hearing before the UN Decolonization Committee on Puerto Rico, where the United States has consistently said Puerto Rico does not need to be reviewed by this body because it doesn't belong there. It has aspects of autonomy. It has aspects of self-governance and sovereignty. And for the first time, the governor of Puerto Rico will be going before this committee now on Monday, specifically because every branch of government has said Puerto Rico is a colony. You have no governance. And to the international community, the United Nations, has been very clear that colonialism is not welcome in the international community. It is immoral. It is unjust. It is unlawful. And there needs to be a process towards decolonization.
Mayor Carmen Yulín Cruz in San Juan, can you respond to the Supreme Court decisions, but also describe the effects of the Puerto Rican debt crisis on the ground, the austerity measures that have been imposed?
Well, two things. First,
it looks like we have her back. We're just having a little trouble.
Can do to start that decolonization process, which should be a self-determination process from the people of Puerto Rico. And
we're having some satellite problems connecting from New York to San Juan. It looks like Mayor Yulín is back again. Go ahead, Mayor Yulín.
Didn't injure anything. So that is an act of good faith that could happen right now, today, and there is no reason and no need to
Sorry,
wait.
we lost you on the satellite. What is the act of goodwill? What is the act of goodwill?
Enough at the municipality to be able to work our finances, where we have gone from a deficit of $104 million when I became mayor to a surplus of $24 million last year, and expected to be a surplus of more than $30 million this year. We've done it without laying off people, and we've done it increasing services. But that has not been the faith of the central government. And of course, when one Puerto Rican suffers, we all suffer. We have had increased number of problems with health reform and health issues. People in the United States should know that we pay the same Medicare tax that you pay, but we get less of the benefits, which again is highly unfair and quietly un-American. Aren't we supposed to all be getting the same for what we pay for, right? So we get less. That means that a lot of the doctors are leaving the island. We have had an exodus of more than 300,000 people in the past 7 years. And of course, that decreases our income basis, which in turn, it's a wheel that goes round and round. People are losing their homes because jobs are leaving. Now, that started with the ending of Section 936 of the IRS Code, where companies could repatriate the earnings that they made in Puerto Rico back into the United States without having to pay federal income tax. Puerto Rico has one of the corporate tax rates that is lowest in the world. It's 4%, and it was just recently added. So there's about $32 million that are $32 billion with a B, that are taken away from Puerto Rico every year without these companies paying 1 single cent of taxes and contributing that way to the Puerto Rican economy. Just recently, a couple of weeks ago, the air ambulance service was shut down because the government had no money to pay. Sometimes there is not enough equipment to conduct the surgeries that are necessary. So it is a crisis that we have seen increasing, and that is putting a lot more strain on the 78 municipalities of Puerto Rico. Some of them, like the larger municipality, which San Juan is, we have been able to weather the storm, but some other smaller municipalities are really hurting and are at the door of having to perhaps not lay off employees, but having to reduce their income. There's one municipality, Ponce, on the lower south end side of the island, that has had its employees working half-time because it isn't able to pay for all its payroll. So there is a humanitarian crisis.
I think it's awful what's happened to the Puerto Rican people. And to think that, we're doing this to our very own American citizens, because that's who they are. And even though they are many miles away from the mainland, what happens there it could very easily happen here. And I don't even know if our government officials are aware of how this colony could affect us all, and how this, not allowing them to have the basic human rights and privileges that we all enjoy, and unfairly taxing them is no different than the King of England, doing taxation without representation. There's something wrong with this picture. This is not the America that we've all come to know. And this is going on under the Obama administration. This is going on under the current government. Hillary Clinton proudly says that she would carry on with another, like a third Obama administration. Is that really what you want? This is really what you really want? Don't take it for granted that the news media is telling you the truth at all times. It's very important that you do the research and fact checks yourself, because there's so many deceiving, fake, satirical websites that have a little disclaimer on their website, but nowhere else. And you don't know whether you're reading a real story or a fake one, but that's not based on fact. I cannot count how many times, there's been things attributed to the Pope, the President, or other officials that never really ever happened. Again, folks, I encourage you to fact check the news. I encourage you to stop being deceived. I would like to see a day when the politicians and our leaders can no longer lie to us. I want them to stop lying.
Welcome back. Do you ever wonder if someone is lying to you? Well, there are some things that you can look for to find the truth.
And we brought in a polygraph examiner to put 5 people to the test and show you how to be a human lie detector.
Did you ever steal anything valued at more than $10, $25?
No.
Are you basically a dishonest person?
Basically a dishonest person?
This polygraph examiner and retired FBI agent doesn't need a machine to pinpoint a liar.
The eyes are a window to the soul. You can see right through them.
What do they expect from me? That's a good question.
Take a close look at this guy's eyes. Before Jason answers, he looks up to the right.
Looking up in the right means you're making up something. You're visually picturing something that's never happened, That's a lie.
Up to the left, you're remembering something. Only problem, it's the opposite for lefties, like Jason, so he's telling the truth. Shifty eyes could also indicate dishonesty.
The moment they complete that lie, they look right back at me because they're trying to see whether I'm buying what they're selling.
Bill Brown says all of the people we interviewed are basically honest. Look at how comfortably they sit in their chair. Liars may rub their neck, tap their fingers, look at their watch, all signs of nervousness.
Or they'll position something between you and them, even if it's only a book or a coffee cup. When you see something like it, why is that? It's just getting a barrier or something between you and me.
Someone telling a fib may lean back in their chair, sit to the side, and keep their arms crossed and hands tightly folded in their lap.
Did you ever put any false information on any form?
On any form? No.
What about people who try to change the conversation?
It makes almost everybody a little bit uncomfortable lie. So if they can say something else in a tangential way and get you to accept that, then they don't have to lie.
And really listen to what they're saying and how they say it.
If all the time you've been talking to them, they've been speaking in one voice, and then all at once they speak in this voice, pretty good indication.
Pretty insightful, and Bill says liars will most likely do a combo of those things, so you have to look out for that. But there's also some things that they just cannot control at all, affected by the autonomic nervous system, and we put that list, if you want to check it out on our website, KOCO.com, if you're really trying to see
really
if someone's being honest or not.
And I was talking to you about this earlier, talked to Bill Brown before you interviewed him, because you were getting everybody ready, and I was thinking, you know, I don't know. You know,
I don't know what to do with my hands. I don't know where to look. Yeah.
Yeah, great to see you.
And he can't put it aside because, you know, he's retired FBI and he's been doing it for so many years. Every time he talks to people, he's looking at that to see if they're being honest.
And the truth is that we really live in a highly deceptive world nowadays. And we can't just take somebody's word for it. We really have to know how to fact check and look up things ourselves. My desire for you is to be empowered as you look through the stories and the videos as we help our mainstream media regain consciousness after their amnesia. And the fact that we have, you know, a lot of resources and a lot of abilities to still be able to produce accurate and correct information tells me that a lot of media outlets have failed us, and some by design. The only people that can save us is not a political leader like Donald Trump or a political leaderess like Hillary Clinton, but we the people. And we the people are still the answer. And so don't depend on the government to solve the problem for you. Don't depend on the government to save you. We have to save ourselves. And there are going to be some public service projects that Electronic Free Press will be doing from time to time, and you are going to hear about them and see them in the news. But for now, I want you to enjoy the YouTube channel, subscribe, go to our Facebook page and subscribe, and always be one of the first to see some of our playlists and what we're keeping track of and what we're analyzing and evaluating for the given moments. Thank you, and have a beautiful, wonderful, and blessed day.